Good. So I'll just welcome everyone on behalf of Commanded Kasi Access Computing to the 2025 Early Career, and that is Early Career Doctoral Academic Careers webinar. So today we're going to start with building one's teaching and research portfolio, and we have exceptional speakers today in both areas of teaching and research. So we have our moderator, Dan Garcia, who is globally renowned for his work in education. We have Gabe, who is also a former LEAP fellow, who is doing exceptionally well at Colorado School of Mines. And then we have the Russ Joseph, who is doing a phenomenal job in the architecture space, doing well at Northwestern University. So it's just great excitement to have the three of them here today to talk about building one's teaching and research portfolios. So I'm going to turn it over to Dan.
Thank you so much, Valerie. I'm so delighted to be leading this panel. This is a super fun gathering. We had this last year. It was really nice in person. We're doing it virtually this year. And I'm so delighted to have Gabe and Russ join us. I have a couple of slides, just a couple of slides to tee off the conversation. Then I'm going to pass it over to Gabe and Russ in whatever order they'd like. I think I was looking, I kind of flipped a coin and said that Russ might have a more general set of slides and Gabe's more advicey slides. So maybe I'll do it in that order. And both of them have good advice. Both of them are seasoned educators and seasoned researchers and have seen lots of teaching and research portfolios in addition to putting their own together, as I have. So we'll talk about that. So it's about 45 minutes of conversation. Now it looks like about 40 minutes. And then we'll transition to Q&A. And I have some questions in case the audience doesn't have enough, but I'd like to let the audience drive that process. And if it's 45 minutes all driven from you, the folks who are listening into this, that's delightful. I don't have to answer any of my questions, but I have mine as a backup. So we can get started. All right. So teaching and research portfolio. So I'm a teaching professor. I don't have a slide about my background, but my very fast background is I went to MIT as an undergrad, fell in love with computer science and computer graphics, went to Berkeley, did a 10-year PhD, fell in love with teaching, and that's why I took so long to graduate, and then joined the Berkeley faculty as a teaching professor. I joined as a first assistant teaching professor, then associate, and now a full. And I've been at Berkeley for 35 years and been on the faculty for 25. So what's your teaching portfolio? So I've had to put this together myself as well as read a lot of my colleagues and made recommendations in terms of writing letters for support for other colleagues. So I've read a lot of my colleagues all around the world. Actually, I've read a lot from Australia and other places, New Zealand. So the teaching portfolio is the first one. What we think of it as a living document. You're supposed to, as you're teaching something, have a brainstorm. I think we just heard Russ Gabe was talking about a piece of software where if you're just brainstorming some ideas, you want to be able to document that. That's literally what you're supposed to do with this teaching portfolio. As you're trying small experiments, as you're seeing pain points, you're putting this together. Obviously, Google Docs is an easy way to always have it open, or some text file if you're more Unix centric, but keep it updated as you're kind of doing things, and then write how it did. The moment you give a good lecture, write about that. And then that can weave into how you're asking good questions, how you're trying to create small experiments, how you're trying to fix the pain points, and how you try to optimize for learning. So they often ask you to state your teaching philosophy. So this means, how do you engage all learners? And so this is just how you approach that question. How are you going to make sure everyone in your class is supported? That means people of different abilities, people of different preparation, and people with different identities. How do you support everybody to be very successful in your space? Whatever your answer is, that's what they're looking for. And it shouldn't just be, I treat everybody the same. I mean, hopefully you have some things to do when someone comes to you with a particular identity or particular, by addressing with culturally responsive pedagogy, or with a particular difficulty of learning because of background or because of preparation. And all of those things are ways that you'd be able to express how you've done it in the past and how you hope to do it in the future. People often cherry pick student quotes. I don't like that because you can always find one student out of 100 that loves you if you have 99 hate you. So I always ask people to include all student quotes. This is controversial, but whenever I look at one and I see one quote, I'm like, yeah, I could have cherry picked anybody, even from the worst teacher in my department. So I always want to see all student quotes to really get a flavor of what it is. And even if it's a large class, there's usually kind of an appendix you can add to this. Sometimes people in the teaching portfolio want to see your exams, your curriculum, your syllabus. They want to see what you've done and how you've built classes. So they want to see that. Um, as you're teaching, and this is including teaching as a graduate student, not just as a faculty member, but as a graduate student, don't be afraid to try new things. Don't be afraid to say like, hey, let me survey you with a Post-it at the end of every lecture, every discussion section, every lab, and maybe ask for what you're doing well anonymously. What you're doing well, that's what your hand Post-its out to everybody. What you're doing well, what you could improve. I often suggest people use the start, stop, keep, change. Those 4 words: start, stop, keep, change. What should I stop doing that isn't working? What should I start doing that I'm not even doing at all? What should I keep doing because it's really working well and don't touch it? And what should I change? Meaning it's mostly working, but it could work better if you did this. Start, stop, keep, change. Wonderful way to get feedback. Use that feedback to drive small experiments, either at the global scale of the whole class when you're an instructor, or the small scale of how to improve your discussion or lab, or maybe giving a lecture. And then write about those experiments and put that in there. That's what I'm looking for, people who are looking for those pain points and looking to try new things and being brave. Co-teach with others to watch your styles. This worked really well for me when I was doing this. Whenever I taught new classes, I was always paired with the expert. We have a culture of team teaching at Berkeley. So I was always paired with the expert. That was really useful for me to, sit next to Dave Patterson. People know Dave Patterson won the Turing Award. I got to teach with him for an entire semester. What a joy and what a delight to learn from this. And he's won all these teaching awards as well as research awards. Amazing. So hopefully you get paired with good teachers and hopefully you can learn from their styles. And the way you do this often, I recommend, is you sit in the front row when they're lecturing. So don't just say, well, okay, they're going to do the front half, I'll do the second half. I don't even attend their class. No, you go to every lecture. When they're lecturing, you sit in the front row and take notes. And then afterwards, take them out to coffee, or as you're walking back to your department, you're giving them feedback of what, maybe if it's circle the slide deck or something on the handout, and you reverse it. You ask them to give notes to you. It's almost like, notes when somebody's acting. So, maybe a little bit louder here. Maybe, you used a term that you didn't define, that kind of thing. Give that feedback and benefit for this. Also, in the teaching portfolio, you might want to talk about whether you contribute to any open education resources. Did you make your lectures Creative Commons? Did you build some software? What did you do to kind of contribute and move the ball forward for other faculty who want to copy what you've done? Phew. Research portfolio. So research portfolio, I'll let my research colleagues kind of speak more to this, but this is thinking about what have you done and where do you want to go? So include the best paper or two, or not all of the papers. If you've written, once you've done this for a long time, you don't typically include every paper, but include the ones that you really want to say, this is the more, or maybe the most recent one. This is who I am. This is like an example of the great research I'm doing and how I write it up. Give links to the others, people, in case people want to see, they have more of those, but maybe even attach the PDF of that. You don't need to be the world's best researcher unless you want to be really in the top 5 or 4 or 5 schools. Then you really do have to be the best at something, some small little piece of that. And what's your home run? They often ask, what's your home run as you're looking at that? So kind of highlight the things that have the most impact. That's the last thing. Often they ask for what your future is, what do you want to go in 10 years, and what's your impact? What do you want to do? How do you want to change it? And at what scale? How many people you're affecting? We often talk about like a 2-dimensional graph where, if I can use my cursor, so the bottom is, say, maybe the impact. This may be how you're making the change. Like over here, you're saving someone's life. Over here, maybe you're teaching them a little bit of CS, okay? And over here is the number of people you affect. So like code.org's hour of code, it's a little bit of CS. It's like 1 hour of CS, but it affects like millions of people. Or maybe you did something that saves a single life. So that's saving a life over here, but you only saved one person. And obviously the top right is you want to save everyone's life. So if you cure cancer, then you're up in the top right because you've obviously had a significant impact on someone's life, and you've done that for a lot of people. So it's really the scale, and talk about that kind of 2-dimensional graph for your impact. I've often seen that. This is something that in some states isn't even allowed. You're not even allowed to say these 3 letters. Really, this space is a place where that supports us and it delights in supporting and blessing and providing outreach to this space. So diversity, equity, inclusion has been something that used to be required at least my campuses you see. Then they said you can't do it, but you can weave it into, if you've been doing BPC work or broadening participation computing work, you can weave it into your teaching and research. So it's not there, but you might not be able to, depending on where you are, trumpet it so much with a document that's standalone. So nevertheless, if you are passionate about DEI, and DEI BJ for belonging and justice as well to that, if you're really passionate about that, then definitely write about it. You want to write about your passion. You don't want to hide yourself. You might not be able to, depending on again what state you're from, say those letters, but you can say how I support all students, and here's why I do this, and here's how I'm doing outreach, and so any initiatives you've been working on, talk about those, and again, roll them into research and teaching if actually it does fit that way, and you can't have a standalone statement or not asked to do a standalone statement. So, are you doing anything at the university level? How do you retain students from dropping out, or how do you support the folks who are getting F's and D's and C's? What are you doing at that level? What are you doing in class to support everybody? Are you doing any research, any outreach outside of the university? Maybe to K-12. I've done a lot of work in K-12. Maybe you're working in prisons. I have some colleagues who are actually volunteering in prisons to do that. Are you making a pathway from community college? There's a lot of things you can do to kind of turn around and reach back and lift other folks up. What were your choices data driven? This is important. Are you just kind of throwing something against the wall and hoping it sticks? Are you actually publishing on this? Are you using data to drive what you're doing? So are your choices data driven, and are you measuring your effectiveness? A lot of people say, all this outreach is great, but where are they collecting data to see if it actually works? So really be able to answer that question. How do you know if it worked? What surveys did you do pre and post? Learn about some of the education research to understand if you're doing some of these outreachy things, what are they doing to move the needle? Are you getting more people into graduate school? Are you getting more people into research? What are the things you're doing to support the passion of young folks who are moving their way forward? And actually, this webinar is part of this same conversation. What are we doing to support younger researchers and younger teachers to join the ivory tower? And I think that's the last slide I have. The next one is a set of questions. So I'll save that to the end, and I'll stop sharing, and I will pass, I think, on to Russ, who can then share maybe a little bit about his background. Both of you share some background, and also share your perspectives on the teaching and research portfolio. Thanks so much, folks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dan. And I will keep it moving here. Okay, so all right. So my name is Russ Joseph. I'm a tenure-track faculty. I'm associate professor here at Northwestern University in Chicago land. Originally, I'm from St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands. And so I grew up in St. Thomas. So if you don't know, it's a tropical island, about like 60 miles to the east of Puerto Rico, if you know where Puerto Rico is. And then I went to Carnegie Mellon for my undergrad degree. I majored in ECE and CS. Right. So like, and then I went to Princeton for my PhD. My research area is computer architecture. And then after Princeton, I moved here to Northwestern. I did internships along the way in both undergrad and grad school, but this is the only like real job I've ever had, if you call it a real job. Yeah, so I have family, wife. We've been married now. Next week will be 25 years. And then we have two daughters. And so you can see here in the bottom right, those are some pictures of them when they were a little bit younger. And then directly above that, it's me running a marathon, which I do a lot. I've run 17 in 17 states. I did 3 already this year, and hopefully I'll do another 2 or so in this fall. So that's a little bit about me. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about research portfolio. And academic portfolios in general is you can think of it as a collection of documents which are curated to showcase who you are as a faculty member. And typically you'll have a research portfolio and a teaching portfolio. Dan talked a bit about the teaching portfolio. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the research portfolio. And these portfolios are these, like Dan said, you can think about these as living documents that you update periodically. One of the ways that they show up prominently is when you have a promotion or tenure case, in which you will typically submit some documents, and that will include research, basically the components of your research portfolio, and the components of your teaching portfolio. And those are submitted as part of your tenure packet documents, along with your CV and a service statement as well. So I'll talk a little bit about the research portfolio. So for research portfolio, things that would be included are you'd have research statement, and this is typically a few pages. It'll the exact length that you when you're submitting a case for tenure or promotion, your university might have some strict limits on the page count, but in general, you can think about this as several pages where you use to describe your research philosophy and basically a narrative that describes your view of research in your field, right, from your perspective. And what it does prominently is that you describe what you think the major big problems are and how your work addresses those big problems, right? And specifically, you talk about what the major accomplishments and contributions that you have done and how they go into solving kind of the big problems in your field. And you talk about your career vision and goals and where you expect to be in the next 5 and 10 years, right? So it's just basically a narrative, tells a story. All right, and then you'll include your top N publications. Maybe the N is 2, maybe it's 3 or something like that. Right, and those are typically, these are the things that you use that you're going to hold up and you say, this is my best work. All right, so these are usually good papers in top venues that you think really have had an impact. And then you can have other research contributions and activities. So if you develop software tools and other things, you can include some descriptions and links about those as well. Okay, so that is literally what your research portfolio looks like. And if I asked you to, you could compose a research portfolio by just basically putting those documents, gathering up that information, putting those documents together, and like putting them in a folder or zipping them up in an archive or something. And then that's your research portfolio. But there's another way to think about this, a longer term view. And that when you are building a research portfolio, what you are doing is you're really planning and conducting your research, right? You are basically doing what you think is the kind of important work that you should be doing as a faculty member doing research. And as you do that, as you make choices about what you're going to work on, what problems you're going to attack, what tools you're going to use to attack them, right? As you lay out sort of a vision over the course of 5 years, 10 years, or whatever, that's really what you're doing. That is really building your research portfolio. And the other part that I just described previously, that's you just sort of putting things together in a document. So that's another way to think of it. The sort of long-term view is that you're making choices every day as a faculty member about what you're going to do. And those should be strategic, they should be long-term, and they should build into your kind of overall vision. And that is sort of the long-term view to think about what you're building your research portfolio is. All right. Because in a way, right, very direct way, what you're doing when you're making those decisions on what you're going to work on and how you're going to prioritize your time, right? The outcome of that is that's going to determine what actual papers you can publish, what actual problems you can solve that will eventually go into that document. Right. So it's a longer term way to think about this. And then, so why is this research portfolio important? Why are we talking about it? What is the real value? So if you kind of view this one way, right? If I'm just kind of looking you up, I could probably find all the papers that you've written, all right? And based on, I can go and I can read those papers in various degrees of detail, and I probably come away with it with some picture of what you are as a researcher, right? And maybe that's good, maybe that's bad. But if you think about what you're doing when you were putting together a research portfolio, what you are doing is you are basically doing that work on your own, right? So you're essentially shaping the narrative. You are shaping the discussion of what you are as a researcher, as a faculty member. And if you do a good job putting that together, right? The person that's so eventually this is going to be used to review your tenure or promotion or what have you. If you do a good job putting together a narrative of what you are as a researcher and the types of problems you work on and why they're important and how you've made important contributions, then you've basically made my job as someone that you made the job of whoever's reviewing your promotion or tenure case a lot easier. You put everything in context, right? And they don't have to go away and grind and read every detail of this paper and try to figure out, okay, well, they worked on this here, and then they worked on that here, and then there's this here, and I think these are kind of loosely connected this way. You were actually getting a chance to say how these things are all connected, how you view them as being important in advancing the field. So by doing a good job putting together your research portfolio, what you are doing is you're basically making easier to promote yourself or for you to get tenure. Right? So that's kind of another way to think about it. Okay. All right. So that's all I had to say. And now I will pass it along to Gabe.
Great. I think I'm just going to sort of reinforce a couple things that you pointed out, um, and anchor that in my own story. Let me see. Come on. All right, that's showing up still? Great. Uh, yeah, so hi everyone. My name is Gabe Fierro, assistant professor at Colorado School of Mines. I also have a joint appointment at a national lab at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, while that still exists. I did my bachelor's, got a master's sort of on the way during my PhD. I did all of those at UC Berkeley, graduated in 2021. My research, I do a lot with sort of knowledge graphs, databases, IoT built environment, which is sort of a mix of, I do stuff with a lot of stuff with smart buildings, doing a lot of stuff with water treatment plants. And I'll sort of touch on that, the fact that I have sort of a foot in computer science, and then I have another foot in these sort of very applied discipline specific domains. And that sort of duality, I think, presented a lot of challenges for me when I was trying to figure out how to pitch myself as a researcher when I was looking for jobs. Um, the non-research stuff, I bake a lot of sourdough. That's a loaf I did yesterday. My wife and I have two cats. I do pottery on the weekends. Is a nice way to not look at my phone, can't touch my laptop. Do a lot of cooking. In fact, my a good friend of mine from undergrad that I met in the marching band when I was at UC Berkeley as an undergraduate. He's over. We're going to cook some lamb birria for some friends tonight. So this is basically the only piece of work I'm doing today. That's my little gift to myself. um, yeah, right. I'm a whole person, right? I'm not just a researcher. So the piece that I wanted to talk on a little bit was storytelling with your portfolio. Um, and this is something that I started thinking a lot about after I was on the hiring committee for our faculty positions the first couple of years I was here. Um, and something I see a lot with students that are applying to PhD programs or applying to fellowships or applying to faculty positions is that you know, most of these other things, Dan and Russ did a great job of covering these. One of the things you submit is your CV. Your CV is essentially a historical list of facts. It's a chronological list of facts of the things that you did. Um, and your statements should not just be, I think, like a simple repeating of those facts, right? And I see this a lot of the statement doesn't give me any additional information about who you are as a person or as a researcher or as a potential future colleague. Says, well, I did this paper and then I did this paper and here's what this paper is interesting to me. And that's fine. It could be a good place to start. But I think the thing that really makes someone stick in your mind, right, is if a reviewer reading these is I'm really looking for a future colleague or I'm looking for a future student, and finding ways of describing yourself and the things you're doing that emphasizes your strengths and tries to speak to what the person reading your application is looking for, right? And that's, I think, if there's any message that I would communicate from my presentation is that put yourself in the shoes of the person who's going to be reading your application. What are they looking for? For example, NSF, National Science Foundation, evaluates all grants on two pieces of two dimensions, which is intellectual merit and broader impact. And so in your proposal, you'd better have a section called intellectual merit, and you'd better have a section called broader impact, right? There's boxes they're looking to check, there's things they're looking for. Make that as easy as possible to find, right? Same thing with like class assignments. You're writing an essay, like make sure your final report covers these topics. Yeah, there's your outline, right? The rubric tells you the outline of the report. So what do I mean by this, right? Um, so mostly about sort of research statement. I think this all carries over into the teaching statement, the other statements you have to do. Um, they should contextualize the facts of your CV, right? What kind of research do you do? What kind of problems do you work on? What kind of collaborators do you engage with? Um, and you want to write to your audience, right? Who is going to be reading your statement and for what purpose and what questions do they need to answer? Um, One of the things that I think is really important, I read a lot of the faculty applications where we ask for a two-page research statement. There's a lot of five-page research statements out there. And if you, and this is the thing that my advisor really hounded on me for is if I'm, you get 2 pages, if it takes you three-quarters of a page or a whole page to get to the point of describing what you do, and why you're different, that's way too much time, right? These people are too busy. They don't have the time to do as detailed of a read of everyone's applications as they would like. And so being able to get to the point as quickly as possible within the first paragraph, they've, to a certain extent already made up their mind about their attitude towards your application, right? Whether or not that's something they consciously do is if I, read 2 paragraphs and I have no idea what this is about, I don't really know how to read the rest of it, right? And that instantly puts me as a reviewer on like, okay, well, you're wasting my time, right? Like I've got too much stuff to read. It's a 5-page research statement. The first 2 pages are background, right? Sorry. And this is true with papers, right? Like your introduction, your abstract, Google the 4-sentence abstract for your research papers. This is generally true. Everyone is too busy to read every single word that you wrote. Make it as easy as possible and as quick as possible for them to identify what's unique, what's important about your application, about your paper, um, and respect their expertise, right? I think one of the challenges as a student, we spend so much time getting better and better about speaking about an increasingly, specific thing. When you are writing an application, when you're just your research statement, your personal statement, it's not necessarily being read by someone that's in your area. So you can't necessarily dive into like, oh, I'm really interested in these non-parametric optimization methods for convex, and you're just like, like maybe I'm doing completely different kind of research, and I have no idea what all those optimization words mean. So you need to be able to connect it to something that I can relate to, right? Even if it is something that's really deep in the weeds of a very particular area, being able to connect to why would anyone care about what you do, right? It's important, otherwise, you wouldn't be working on it, but helping people to understand it where they are experts in their field, they are your future colleagues in a computer science, computing sort of related area. They know some things, they may not know everything. So being able to make it easy for them to relate to that is really important. And so a little bit about my thing. So when I was going on the job market, I didn't have as many publications as I wanted. This is one of the dangers of comparing yourself to everyone else in your program, is everyone's churning out however many NeurIPS and ICML papers they can a year. My advisor was generally like, people write too much, people publish too much. Often like it's like people write as if they have more to say than they actually do. And so he's he's like, when you have something good to say, then you go and write the paper. And then the result of that is I didn't have necessarily as many applications as publications as I wanted. Um, I had lots of software development. I was building a lot of things. I had lots of collaborations with people in the building industry. I wasn't working with Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon, Google, like these big companies that so many of my fellow students were. And so I had a lot of non-traditional impact, and that I was influencing maybe a particular area or discipline in like smart buildings and construction and commissioning and controls, which are not typically areas that computer scientists engage in. And my first round for writing a lot of my application materials, I was like, oh, I do a lot of applied work. And the advice I got was like, don't say applied. You say applied, people are like, oh, just go get a software engineering job. You're not a researcher. So how do I pitch myself? And the story that I found was something called Pasteur's Quadrant, which is rather than looking at basic and applied research as two ends of a single spectrum, you look at them as sort of orthogonal dimensions, and that a quest for fundamental understanding and then consideration of use, right? So like Edison making the light bulb, not really contributing to fundamental understanding, but he made something useful. Niels Bohr in the model of the atom, he's like, I'm doing this to understand how an atom works. Who knows how that's going to be used? And then people like Louis Pasteur, who are, trying to solve this problem of, like bacterial contamination, and then this societal need drives the basic understanding that we need to go and do, right? There's a need for research that we can immediately apply into certain kinds of problems. And finding that framing helped me when I was writing my materials and describing the work that I did. It wasn't, here's the papers I wrote and here's the collaborations I did. It was, no, I'm engaging in this use-inspired basic research where maybe, publishing in the top CS conferences was not what was going to get me the impact that I wanted. It wasn't how I was going to publish, right? There's a lot of, so I I present a lot of industrial conferences, a lot of professional conferences. I do a lot of tutorials with practitioners, a lot of sort of workforce training for people that need to use computing to make building smarter and make better use of renewable energy. And so I found a way of making, from one perspective, what was a very distinct weakness in my application, which was not having a lot of top publications and top venues, is actually a little bit more of a strength, and that my effort was being put towards translating basic research into practice and putting myself in front of audiences, practitioners, where that stuff could actually be adopted into real products, could actually be adopted into real world workflows. And I was able to point out some of those things. So yeah, so finding that framing and the storytelling around looking at my application from a different angle, my research statement provided that framing to my reviewers. And that's ultimately what got me my job that I have today. So it's worth thinking about. It's the kind of thing you write early, put in front of people, accept their feedback, even if it's harsh. I probably rewrote all my statements 3 or 4 times, like from scratch, to get to the point where I actually liked how they sounded and people got what I wanted to get out of them. But the power of storytelling is it's not just the set of facts, it's how you tell the reviewers to look at them. Yeah, that's what I had.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. What coverage. This is really nice. A couple of things that I saw that I wanted to highlight that I just were really well said was the point that you get to drive the narrative. That's super important to be able to frame things in the right way. And I also appreciated, I think Gabe's idea that what's the phrase? I apologize for the length of this. I didn't have time to make it shorter. It's really hard to be able to take and abstract away everything you've had into the core thing. You should be able to have a pitch deck in your head, an elevator pitch, anytime you're walking around life and you happen to get an elevator with your dean or with a funder or with someone who needs to know who you are. Steve Jobs was famous, by the way. I'll tell this mini story because I'm in the Bay Area and he lives like 20 miles or something from here. Is when he was walking around Apple, when he was still alive, he was the founder of Apple, co-founder of Apple. If he ever got in the elevator with somebody young and he didn't know who they were, he would use that time in the elevator to say, tell me who you are and why you deserve to get paid by me, by this company. And what I've heard is that when you didn't have your story told well, you were gone. Like people, and what's funny is enough of that word got around that Joe got fired. Why? Because he was in the elevator with Steve and didn't have a good answer to why are you here? Like why, what do you do and why is it important? And summarize it to me, the CEO. That people started to use the stairs. And so there's a whole shift of people not using the elevators for this tall building because no one wanted to be caught in that moment, right? So you always should have this. And in fact, what I love about Valerie and Commanded is when we've got together face to face, we'll go around and give a pitch. We'll have a slide deck. And sometimes people read the slides a little bit too much. I'd rather they put their back to the slides and have it internalized when they do this. And so we could read the slides, but you shouldn't be reading the slides when you can point to them or something. There's a key graph or something, but have that summary also. So this is not just it. I'm recommending something above and beyond what we're talking about on this webinar, which is create this document that's a feature in your portfolio, but to always abstract it even more to the 30-second pitch, the 3-minute pitch. How can you think about that space and be able to share that with anybody who needs to know? And that's your dean, your chair, a colleague at a conference. You go to Tapia and, hey, what do you do? Boom, 30 seconds of a little bit what you do and who you are. I really also appreciated sharing that we're whole people and that we have families and we have, or we're looking to have families. We have other interests outside of computing. All those things are powerful to be able to share who you are. And you might say, tell me who you are. And you might say, you mean as a person or as a researcher or as a scholar or as a teacher? So there's a lot of these dimensions that are part of that. And I really appreciate that. So again, thank you both for really, really dynamic set of follow-up, really refinements to the overall picture of we're trying to help you build these tools, build these documents that will help you in your career. And they're used by different folks. Again, they're used to apply to a position. They're used to get promotion once you get that position. They're used for NSF to give you funding. They're used in a lot of different ways. And so you kind of often, I really do appreciate Gabe's like, consider your audience. Always know, speaking 101 is consider your audience. Always know who's reading it and then be able to, don't just have the same boilerplate thing that you send to everybody. No, this audience is going to fund things that are about this particular thing. Well, make sure you tune it to them. NSF is looking for this in this particular call. Tune it to that call. Those things are super important, and I really appreciate that perspective. So now this is the fun part where we open this up to. I'll give a chance to Russ and Gabe to add anything else you want to add to that kind of summary of what we've seen, and then we can open up to questions for anybody.
I think the only thing I would add is it takes time to get to the point where you can efficiently describe what you do. I often remark there's at least for me, there was an inverse relationship between how long I've been doing research and how long it takes me to explain it. As a first-year grad student is like, all right, let me talk to you for 15 minutes that give you the context for understanding what it is exactly I'm doing. And now there's like 2 sentences. I can get it done in a couple sentences depending on who I'm talking to. Yeah. So it takes time. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of practice. And I don't know. It's like being kind of bad at something is the first step to being kind of good at something. So it's just because you haven't nailed it the first time does not mean just you. There's a line, right? It's a continuous line. You have to go through the point where you're bad at something in order to get much better at it. So it takes practice.
Delightful.
It takes practice.
Want to add anything, Russ?
No, I mean, I agree with everything that's been said, especially what Gabe just said right now. It's basically and I think you get better over time, but anytime you start out on something new in particular. If you have a new project and you're just getting started, sometimes it's really hard describing what you're doing, and it's not until you've done it a few times and had people not understand that you eventually get better. But just keep at it.
Yeah, you get to an end of your talk and there's no questions. It's not necessarily because you nailed it, right?
That's a great point. That's a great point. I'll add an interesting thing. Sometimes you say, hey, what do you work on? And there's like 3 levels of ability to answer the question. The easy answer, the kind of low, medium, high, if I'm going to rate somebody, the kind of C level, then a B level, and the A level. Okay. The C level says, here's what I work on. Okay. So I pause for effect. The B level, which is like 1 level beyond that, says, here's what I work on and here's how it's gone. Okay. Now there's another dimension. Okay, I've done some stuff and here's what happened as a result of doing that. The A level, here's what I work on. Here's how it's gone. Wait for pause for effect. And here's why it's important. See, if you don't say why it's important, then okay, they do this, but why do I care? Why would anyone care? Why should we care? Why does society care? Boom. Why it's important, why that has had impact, why it has potential to have impact, why it has had impact. That's the important part. So again, what you done, how to go, and why do we care? That's a nice piece of summary for that. So make sure that story, that kind of theme is in your pitch. It's in your document. It literally should be the abstract of your teacher. Here's what it is. And like, it's almost, I've actually seen that. I've actually seen like an abstract to the teacher before. Like, there's 25, in fact, in Australia, there's no limit. So I've had an 85 page where it had this and had an appendix. It was 85. Okay. But they had an appendix. Here's the story I'm telling. That beauty, the power of abstraction to say, if you don't read the rest of this first paragraph, here's what the rest of the document says. And those three things are then answered. So super important. Good stuff. All right. We're at the open mic time. This is super fun. I see some hands. Let me call out the hands who are there in order. I think they show up in order from top down for my thing. So I'm seeing Iman. Do you want to jump in? And feel free to turn your mic on and turn your video on. And yeah, thank you. Nice. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for this talk. This is really helpful. My name is Iman. I'm a fourth year PhD student at the University of Washington, and I study equitable TS education research. So something that I just came back from a doctoral consortium where they had talked about how to like pitch your research to faculty when you're on the job market. And one thing that it came up was how we should introduce things like artificial intelligence more into our research. But that's something that I've been doing for the past 4 years. And I was wondering, like, what are your I know I have like still more time, I guess, till I get to that point, but I guess what's your opinions on that? Like, how do you like pivot your research or like do it in a way that's not I don't know, like fake or not something that's like super like distant from what you have been doing before. If you even recommend me doing that. Yeah, I guess I'd love your insights on that.
So I'm hearing there's a call for bringing AI into something that you may not have been including it into your work, but there's a call now to do this and to kind of say, hey, why aren't you using AI for that? Do you have an answer? And so how do you navigate this kind of fundamental shift that we all have to do, is not ignore the elephant, the 600-pound gorilla in the room who was like the AI monster, and how do you bring that into your work?
Yeah, or if like I don't know if you think that I should maybe instead of going into like a research or teaching job, like take time to do a postdoc and try to incorporate that. Yeah, I guess I was wondering.
Oh, okay. There's a second question about whether postdoc is the right thing to do. I'll let Russ and Gabe do first. There.
Okay, so I would say, so is this regard to kind of how to present your work, or is this more as in like what type of work should I be doing? To be clear.
I guess it's like sorry, I know it's unclear, but I think more how to like present my work, but also like if you think it's important that I do take time to look into like AI or like other things and incorporate that into my work as well.
Okay, so if you have not used AI in your work, really, I do not think you should attempt to present, oh, this is how AI factors into the work I've done. Because I think that people see through that pretty quickly. I really would not advocate doing it. Now, so I think you should present your work in the best way that you can, but keep it above board and don't stretch in ways that you're unlikely to be successful. Now, if you think about your work and you think about ways in which you can use AI in your work going forward, then I would invite you to spend some time thinking deeply about how that could be the case, and exploring and reading and talking to other folks and thinking about how you can pivot your future work towards that. But I really would not try to bend and twist yourself in all sorts of crazy ways to kind of present something that's not really accurate. Mm-hmm. That's my suggestion, because I think people will see through that.
Okay, that makes sense.
But if you want to honestly think about how your future work could incorporate AI, absolutely, it's worth to spend your time thinking about doing that and talking to folks and getting their suggestions.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the thing I'd add to that is depending on what you're writing these statements for, if there's for faculty position, there's often a lot of this sort of future looking work. Mm-hmm. And I think if you're approaching a problem through more like classic or traditional methods, and you're like, hey, since I started my PhD, all this Gen AI stuff has taken the world by storm. And you can sort of turn this question you have for us into a sort of question about your future research, which
Mhm.
is what exactly is the role that these new AI technologies play, right? That you have this very strong foundation. Again, this is the kind of thing to talk through with your advisor because I don't know the specifics of your research, but that I think there's a lot of work where people are saying we're just going to use AI for this. And I think there's maybe less work on looking at the interface between the existing methods and what the AI stuff does, right? Is like knowing why people are interested in AI and why they're maybe interested in applying that to that particular field. And what you're curious about of how AI relates to your existing work can be something that you can begin to pontificate on in certain parts of your application or certain parts of that statement. Um, because it is an unfortunate, I think, reality that especially a lot of funding opportunities is the feedback is like, well, why didn't you use AI for that?
It's exactly what I'm hearing. Yeah, exactly.
So it's finding intellectually consistent ways of recognizing the influence of AI, and importantly, relating that to the things that. And again, it's like knowing your audience. And this is when I'm starting to write some new proposals now. And the needle I'm attempting to thread is I'm guessing that all of the reviewers are being told to basically emphasize AI things or to focus on things that are AI focused.
Mhm.
But they don't necessarily just want to rubber stamp anything that just has AI in it. And you can sort of see inside the call for papers in conferences, they say, don't just give us an LLM thing. We want like real science that approaches this. And so being critical about that interface between the classical methods and the Gen AI methods and recognizing the influence and seeking to examine like how exactly that's going to work or what does it mean to have Gen AI. That's how I'm choosing to try and address that for my own work. And yeah, I would agree. Like don't pretend you're an AI researcher, but you're like this is a new technology that we need to critically examine, and here's the lens I'm going to do it from, can be a framing that's helpful, right? Anchor it in where your strengths are, right? Your CV is the list of supporting facts that justify the statements you're making inside your statements.
Mhm.
And you can use that as the jumping off point where you earn the right to sort of pontificate about the future.
Okay. Okay then.
That's a great question. I'll just add two brief things. One, you also asked about a postdoc, but
Mm.
it for me it also depends. I'm going to push back and ask, depends where you are in your program. So if you're very new in your program and you have a big runway, then it's like, you know what, you got enough years to think about how AI would do something and then maybe pivot or do some stuff. If you're 1 year out and you're going to be applying on the job market this year, you don't have time. You're just packaging up what you have to get ready and sell yourself well. So it's more like, do you have the time in your research plan at the time in graduate school to consider this fun new thing? It did come out in November 22. So it's like, well, it's been around for a little while. So it's like, do you have the time to, if you haven't been using it, to bring it in and use it in a real way or have something to say about it? I did this experiment. I looked at it that way. So it's a little bit about your runway.
Mm.
And just graduate and get your job and then consider it when you join the faculty. But if you have more time in grad school, then hey, explore it, see where it is, see if it's all, see if the amount of hallucination is not acceptable in your domain. All these things are interesting things to ask and have conversations about if you have the runway to play with it. But also think about the tools just to be more productive, to throw some brainstorm ideas for this. And AIs can be just useful in your productivity as well as in your research as well. You asked about a postdoc. We did have an earlier webinar that kind of talked about that yesterday a little bit. So I'll try to summarize what I was one of the members of that panel. A postdoc is in some field. This is the kind of 2-sentence summary. In some subfields of CS, a postdoc, the panelist said this, is expected. So if that's the case, then you're going to do a postdoc because that's, for example, in pre-med, if you're going to be in biology, everybody takes the postdoc to take their thesis, to put into a book, and then go on the mark. So there's a little bit of like, it depends if in your subfield, it's an expected thing to do. If it's not, then go for the job market and go for the position. You might be competing with some people who had a postdoc, and that gives them a little bit more time to polish their package more and do more research and get more papers out. But if you're able to get the job, then go for it. So put yourself on. If you don't want to do a postdoc, then just go on the market and see what the market will bear, and see if there'll be some positions for you if you like those positions. If not, the postdoc is a really nice fallback to a place to say, you know what, maybe I didn't have enough. Maybe the reason I didn't get the job because I didn't have papers, or didn't do this, or didn't do that. So a postdoc is a place for you to have more seasoning and more time to simmer if you need more time to simmer and generate more productivity. So that's my postdoc. That was a summary, really briefly, of like a 90-minute conversation in which quite a bit of it was about a postdoc or not.
Thank you.
Hope that's useful. Thank you so much. I see Andre has his hand up. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Okay, so first of all, I want to say thank you, Dan. It's good to see you again. And to Russ, and to Tamika, and to Valerie, and Gabe. I think I've met you last year as well. And if anybody else is on here that I met last year, it's good to see you all as well. As you all were talking, my mind started wondering. So I apologize, because I guess my first question is, when do we get this recording? Because my mind started thinking about all these different things and how I could apply what you were saying. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, he's still talking. So I had to reel it in. And the reason my mind went all over the place
That's great.
is because I'm doing AI in education. And we tossed that term out. And for those people who aren't in that space, they don't realize it includes AI, machine learning, human-computer interaction, software engineering, inference, as well as learning sciences. So all that lumped together is AI in education. And I don't think, people outside the field understand all that. So then I was like, oh my goodness. And the reason that matters is because I'm in the process of applying for a Fulbright. I started off applying for a Bourne Fellowship to do AI in education in Vietnam. Then I pivoted to doing a Fulbright application to Vietnam, because Fulbright is due in September, Bourne is due in December. So my thinking is I'll do Fulbright, and where I mess up, I'll pivot and do Bourne. When the process of me working through that, my advisor's like, oh yeah, Adobe's also doing something, and Apple's doing something. And I'm, and so I appreciate what you all are saying, because in each one of those scenarios, I'm having to craft my research statement target specific to the audience. Because Apple's different than Adobe, and they're both different than Bourne, and they're both different than Fulbright. So I guess two questions, besides the fact that when I'm gonna get the video, because I got to look at it again to really unpack that. But two questions. Number one, how do you all, well, let me first of all say to the people who are here, if anyone is available and want to be a partner to work with me in crafting my 30-second, 3-minute, whatever, I'll work with you, you work with me, and let's work together to build that out. And I'm saying it to the people here, meaning my peers, because I don't, I think it'd be easier if we all work together on that. That's number one. Number two, and this is to the experts here, how do you all deal with that when you're talking about getting funding from different audiences, whether it's the early career, because at some point I want to submit early career. I don't know what it looks like, because what's going on with NSF. But even if you don't do early career, you still have to get money from funders, because that's one of the things that builds your research is funding. And if you're not getting the funding from the federal government, where are you getting the funding from?
Great questions. I'll let Russ and Gabe chime in first.
Yeah, so there were a couple questions in there, right? So one is the like, where do you get funding from, right? What else was there? Sorry.
Well, I was just wondering how you well, the early career, because did you all talk about early career? And again, I don't even know if that's going to apply to us, because who knows what's going on with NSL? I mean, they're cutting the budget in half, so I don't even know if that applies. But I know I've been told that one of the components when you get your first faculty position is they want you to raise money for the institution. And so I'm wondering, how do you all make that pivot space when you're first trying to raise money and you have different audiences? Now, like again, in my case, I'm looking at getting a fellowship with Apple and potentially also getting an internship with Adobe. And that's different. That's brought to me vis-a-vis my advisor. And I'm just wondering what recommendations would you all have as far as navigating that space as a new faculty person or income? Because the other person talked about postdoc. Some of that will come out in postdoc, but what happens if you don't get the postdoc? Does that answer the question? I'm sorry.
It does, yeah. Russ, if you have something to say, I'm still early career. I'm trying to figure this out for myself. I don't know.
Okay, so let me start first with the funding, where to get the funding. First, let's start there. So one, okay, federal government, sure, but there's not just NSF, right? There are other funding agencies. Again, we live in very interesting times, and there's certainly not enough money in general as there was, let's say, this time a year ago. But NSF, DOE is another big funder. There are kind of other kind of agencies that fund NIH, depending on what you're doing as well. Again, there are all sorts of things are different now, but in historically, those are other places that fund research, not just NSF. And then there are also potential opportunities with industry partnerships, right? So, all of the big kind of names in tech, right? They all have faculty partnership or other sorts of arrangements, right? And you can get gifts from them. They have, competitions, where you submit a proposal. It's usually a lot shorter. Their topics are usually a lot more applied or kind of focused. And it's often not as much money, but there are other ways that are helpful. Basically, you can have send your students to work there. You can do sabbaticals and other things. And they have a lot of resources. In particular, right, you're talking about AI. In industry, they have GPUs, right?
Right.
GPUs out the wazoo, right? That you would not ever in your life be able to get your hands on in academia.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So there are all sorts of other resources.
Yeah, and I saw that NVIDIA has a GPU grant proposal out, but again, that's all they're giving you is GPU usage.
Oh, but don't knock that, man.
Yeah,
That's
what you're missing.
You cannot afford to buy with any amount of money you're getting from any federal agency the amount of GPU time that you get from them. All right, so don't knock that.
Thank you.
All right, and so that's about funding. Let's see. And then the other question was basically how do you kind of target your
Your
work to other offenses?
Well, so when you create your general research statement, and yes, it's the audience is going to change a little bit. Like like again, if I'm talking to you, you understand AI in education, then I don't need to break down the specific components. But now, as I'm listening to you all, I think now that I need to break down the specific component and talk about why that matters and what's the value to the reader, to the audience.
Yeah.
So here's my suggestion. So you could imagine you have some sort of big kind of, large document or kind of research portfolio. And that's where you think about kind of your kind of grand vision and, more detail. And then per need, right? If you were submitting something, you will take that big version and you will kind of rewrite it. You can paraphrase, you can cut pieces here or there, you can emphasize, but that's where you kind of focus it for your specific audience, right? So you have sort of one general kind of document or, collection of documents. And then as you need to, for whatever you're applying for, or whoever your audience is, you kind of tweak it, right? So you kind of, cut and paste and then kind of massage it or kind of, focus it. All right. And that's a way to kind of keep things manageable. Because like if you don't want to start from scratch every single time. Right. So if you have one sort of, kind of starting point document, and then you can kind of, spin off little versions here for whatever purpose. And that's maybe one way to kind of keep it more manageable, right? And you're going to emphasize whatever is important for that particular thing. But generally speaking, you do what you do as a researcher, right? So what you're going to be saying for one person or another is not going to be entirely different, right? You're just
That's
going to
correct.
have some different kind of emphasis or focus or what have you.
Right, exactly.
But it's not going to be, 100%. It's not going to be completely different, right? It'll be kind of a version of the broader one.
Gotcha.
That's how I
Thank
would
you.
approach it.
Thank you.
The one thing I would add, so my institution has a subscription to a website called Pivot, which basically collects funding opportunities and they organize them by sort of area. So there is a fair amount of money out there. A lot of it is very specific, like a lot of foundation and private money. They have very specific things that they care about. And it is the kind of thing that you just sort of get better at of how do I make the things I want to work on match the problems they want to solve.
Right.
And you may not get to work on exactly what you want to do, but if there's enough of an overlap, and you're like, well, I have the money, I can check the boxes for this funding opportunity. And with the, some of the extra time working with some students is like now we get to begin to work on the thing that I actually care about as well because there's a non-zero overlap.
Thank
Right.
you.
Well, that's a good point. And yeah, so they're at your university or whatever, they're often kind of places where they aggregate calls, and that's at most universities there's something like that. One other thing is I think it's also useful to consider collaborations as an opportunity to get involved in funding that you might not ordinarily be able to. So in particular, right, if you were in education, right, so AI education, there are ways for you to kind of work with other folks where they need educational kind of component to their proposal or their work. And that's another way in which you can kind of get hooked into other funding opportunities that you might not be able to on your own.
Thank you.
So think about collaborative approaches.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, Andre. That's great. Yeah, there are lots of funding agencies. Do know that it's a tougher time because if NSF and federal funding is now being reduced, now the same number of people who are looking for funding are now looking for a fewer number of the existing people who still have that. So it might be a little tougher than it was 3 years ago when there were more opportunities. So you're in a more competitive space. But I wish you luck, and I think it's an exciting space. You're certainly at the cutting edge, right? AI in education is the cutting edge of education research. So it's exciting that you're there working on that. That's good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
For the question. I see a question from Joe, which I'll answer live, and I also support. Gabe and Russ have some thoughts on it, which is you're interested in a teaching career. You could graduate. You might not have a ton of teaching experience, and you look at maybe my career and I say, I was there for 10 years and I had a chance to teach 16 different courses or 16 total GSI semesters. And that was a lot. And as a result of that, I looked really good on paper and it was great to get that position. If you've taught less, should you think about stalling graduation to get some more teaching experience, to kind of build up that teaching resume where you have more chances to run the experiment, to do the thing and do that, which is really interesting. Versus being kind of more straightforward, a 5 or 6 year plan, and you get out and you try to get the role and do teaching there. I have a very quick story, which is interesting. So there was a colleague back at Berkeley when I was a grad student whose name was Moore Harchal Balter. And Moore won the Outstanding GSI Award the year before I did. So she won it the year before, then I won it the next year. So we both knew each other, we were both grad student friends and everything. Her advisor said, you need to teach as little as possible, focus on research and get out. Get the job, and then you'll get the salary, you'll get this, you'll build your career. Don't build your career as a grad student, build your career as a professor. So she graduated super fast. Okay, so she got out, got a job at CMU. Russ, she might have actually overlapped a little bit with Moore. And so she was amazing. Her career has blossomed. She's an amazing. So she was one of these. She was a great teacher early, young, she's like her second year in, and she like showed promise and she got out as fast as she could and she did great at CMU. I took the exact opposite approach. I fell in love with teaching. My research stalled, and it wasn't like I was doing this consciously. I just was focusing on my hours where I loved, which was teaching. And I ended up not working research for like 6 years of my 10-year graduate, like basically teaching straight for 6 years. So when I got out, I had all this teaching experience, and I got a job at Berkeley. She got a job at CMU. We both did very well. Looking back, I probably could have, if I had had the advice, if my advisor was love the fact that I was teaching, because I was teaching the course that he was teaching. And so he had the easiest job basically, because I was doing his job for him, because he was mentoring me, but I was writing the exams, I was setting the agenda, I was writing the syllabus. Like he would basically let me have the reins of the class as a grad student, and I blossomed as a grad student teacher. That was a great experience for me. I wouldn't change a thing again. But could I have done it earlier? Probably. Would I have been as marketable if I had done more? Maybe. I don't have that answer, but Moore was very marketable with a very little teaching, but clearly won the teaching award after one semester, and then just a research superstar and got a job. I got a teaching award and taught a little bit more, got a second teaching award. So I had 2 teaching awards, and then I got and all this experience. And so I was marketable. So both of us did well. So it really is a question of, have you done what you wanted to do? Did you succeed in your early time? Did you have some good ratings? Like, here's an example. If you bombed the first time, I might say, you know what, if you wanted to have a teaching career, maybe take another year to have more chance to do well, right? It's like, if you've done well enough that you think that standing on that leg of the stool, look, if your teaching statement is going to say I've done well, then there's there. Mostly I would say don't stall, graduate when you can. But if it is the case that you didn't do so well, but you want to make teaching your thing, then maybe having another chance to another shot, right? Give me another shot, coach. I want to go in again. Let me another. If you need that time to kind of build it up to be strong enough because you don't think you have enough to stand on, then I would say maybe that's the rare case. I would stall and take another year to teach, or maybe do a teaching postdoc. That's another opportunity to have more time to kind of get that experience, to have those good ratings, the good reviews, the experiments you want to run. So more of it is, do you think what you have in your teaching in the pocket, in your teaching pocket, is that strong enough to get you the jobs you want? If not, then maybe having more time to do that, either as a teaching postdoc or as a one-year lecturer. There's a lot of one-year lecturer positions where it's like a teaching post. It's not called a teaching postdoc. You're actually on the career. You get a job, and you're filling in for a university that needs a spot there, and you maybe have to move around and some flexibility there. So if you just think you need that to get the job you want, then that's a way to get that. So it's really more about you doing some little introspection, Joe, of, do you think you have what it is to be competitive at the space you want to compete? Are you competing in the top 4, top 20, top 50, top 100? Like, where do you want to go? What's your aspiration? And thinking, do you have it? If you have it, then go for it. Don't stall. If you don't have it, then giving some time to get that, which might be stalling in grad school, or might be the teaching postdoc or the one-year lecture, is a way to do that. Hope that has a long answer to a short question, but I really appreciate the question. And I'm seeing some nods from Russ and Joe, from Russ and Gabe. So feel free to add some color to that if you'd like.
I have 2 things to add to that. One is, in your application, is providing context to your teaching experience. At Berkeley, when I was there, we had to be a TA for at least, you had to be a TA at least twice to meet the minimums for the program requirements. At other PhD programs, that wasn't necessary at all, right? So sometimes we would get a candidate that came in and they said, "Oh, I taught 3 times," and it was not required at all by the program. So if these are things that you're opting into, it's the kind of thing to really emphasize. You're like, I'm doing teaching because it's something I really care about. And providing context, like, I'm seeking out, different kinds of classes, or really anchoring like why you're interested in teaching, and how how the facts in your CV support the statements you want to make. So that's, having that context, I think, is important to have in your applications. The other thing I would add is we had a couple faculty candidates who would come in, because you have the statement about broadening the range of subjects in your teaching background. We had a couple candidates come in, and we said, well, what classes do you want to teach? What classes can you teach? And they said, I have a PhD in computer science. I can teach anything. I was like, well, that's probably true to a certain extent. Like, with practice, you could probably teach any subject, but you don't have, you have experience in teaching, like convex optimization. Like, maybe talk about that more specifically, right? I think it's a stronger application to speak more deeply about a couple things where you've really gone in and show how deeply you've thought about that area and how your perspective on teaching made that class better, and then to take that experience and that work you put in there to say, and I would love to extend that to these other classes. For me, that feels like a stronger story than saying, I taught 5 different classes across all different areas of computer science. Like, you only have so much space. Doing your breadth first coverage is, I mean, that's maybe great for certain kinds of institutions where you might need to teach a whole bunch of classes, but it's like what really sets you apart as a candidate is probably the care you took to think about how to teach that subject well. And then you can take that experience and move it elsewhere. So it's not necessarily the case that broader experience across subjects is going to be better. And certainly, you know, don't necessarily go into this like I could do research in any area and I could teach any subject. Just put me in front. It's like, well, we're looking for someone who can teach AI. Can you like how well can you do that, right? So
Also a little bit of hubris as well.
yes, yes, yes.
Russ, you want to add?
I mean, no, those are great points. Those are like, yeah, both. I agree with everything said. And Dan, that was a really great story that shows. Like, I think Dan's a little humble. Dan is a rock star,
Mm.
and Moore is also a rock star. Like, absolutely, both of you are rock stars in those, completely different approaches, but gotten you to kind of be able to do great things in your career. So, yeah.
It's very sweet, Russ. What I will add, I just Gabe was thinking, my brain came up with a point, which was there might be opportunities in the summer that doesn't slow your progress down. So there are sometimes universities that'll have a summer, like 6 or 8 week teaching position that lets you either be a TA or the instructor. Jump on those. If you're looking for more chance, that won't stall you, right? So 6 weeks, 8 weeks in the summer is not going to really stall your progress. You'll still graduate in the N years that you plan to, that you're funded to. Because again, the longer you stay, the more you're stressing your advisor who's kind of helping with funding. So there's a little bit of that as like getting out, because there's a whole pipeline of people that they're going to bring in behind you. So look for opportunities kind of above and beyond. And sometimes, rarely, you'll be able to find places outside your university that have summer opportunities. So it might be that your institution has some summer opportunities. Jump on those if you can. Jump on teaching while you're researching. Maybe, again, that doesn't necessarily mean extending it past them N years. And maybe other universities might have this chance for kind of a summer position that you might be a perfect candidate for in your field. So, or in the class you want to teach to give you that breadth. So there might be some opportunities that doesn't mean that you need to kind of add an extra year, and now you've got to find funding and blah blah blah, and now you delay. As I said, I think I delayed my graduation probably 4 to 5 years compared to Moore. Moore was like a 5 year, I was a 10 year, so that's a 5 year difference in how many years we spent in grad school. But I didn't think I needed to do that. Maybe, who knows? I can't. It's hard to go back, but there might be some opportunities without delaying to take some of these summer opportunities now. Good stuff. Good question. Other questions from the audience? This is so much fun. I do have again some back of the. I have a back in my back pocket. I got some questions here that I can lean on but I'll make sure I look to the Q&A to see if I see anything. Valerie, oh yes, I saw Valerie raise your hand and then drop it. Valerie, jump in, please.
So I do have one question that I would love to address, and that is, in terms of your portfolio, how do you address, let's say, if you've pivoted with respect to your research areas? Because sometimes you may try for that not to occur, but it may occur. So just want to get your thoughts on, if you pivot, do you mention what you did before and the connection, and things like that? And then also a question with respect to the teaching portfolio, do you need to have a teaching philosophy?
Mm.
Oh, so I just raised those two. Do you find that that's kind of expected? But usually, as a grad student, you probably don't have enough experience yet to gain that philosophy just yet. So, just if you could comment on those two aspects.
I'll do the teaching philosophy first because I mentioned it. It was one of the first bullets that I had, and then other folks can jump in with the pivoting question. And there's also kind of a meta question, Valerie. Thank you for bringing those up. Two excellent questions. The third question that really does: what happens if you've done research and it hasn't gone well? Like, is the null result something that you should? Can we celebrate failure? Like, is that a thing that we can learn from? That this AI applied to this topic isn't so meaningful, or whatever you decide to do. If it doesn't go well, how do you frame it? How do you talk about that as I learned something from it? We all learned that this, at least this application in the way that I didn't work, and we're gonna. So how did you pivot? So anyway, so pivoting, but also if you pivoted, was it because of failure? And you're gonna talk about that. How do you pitch it well? So in terms of philosophy, I have two thoughts on that. One is sometimes the philosophy statements are very generic, and that might be because the student didn't really have a philosophy and it's a generic. It's also hard to come up with a unique philosophy. I've read enough of these that they all start to become the same. So because of that, I think they have less weight to me, because it's rare for me to read something in a philosophy statement that doesn't say, I want to support all students in all ways. That's a very generic thing, and there are different flavors of it, but basically it all says I want to support all students in different ways, and I want to bring their identities and support their, so there's a little bit of the philosophy statement having less weight than it used to. And I was like, "Ooh, what's your philosophy? Is it different than mine?" But they all start to merge together in a big soup of supporting all students in all ways, and bringing their all identities to the space. So I would say, if you haven't created one, you could. There's a in Australian culture, there's something called a walkabout, where you basically take a walk and decide who you want to be as a person, as an adult. Okay. So take that time to really reflect on what drives you. Is there an overall theme that drives what you're trying to do when you teach things? Is there kind of is there just something hovering above you that is like, this is what I'm trying to do every day. I'm trying to do this, and that's the philosophy. Okay, so does that come to, or does the philosophy come from, I tried something, it didn't work, and I've learned some things, and that philosophy is then been affected by the things that I thought was my philosophy, but it isn't, because it didn't work when I tried the small experiment. So anyway, if you don't have a philosophy, the option one is think about it, Google it, play with it, read other people's philosophies and see if any of them ring true. I mean, you really want to say your own words, so it really should come from you. But if you have zero idea what that is, maybe kind of look and have some conversation with other people and then talk about that. It's also a great thing to do. I really appreciate Andre's like, let's make a community of people to support each other. I would love to see a community of people of young teachers talking about their philosophies and how are we approaching a particular thing, because that philosophy might impact where you first take the first steps, because the philosophy can influence that and thinking about that. So that's the philosophy point. Maybe I'll share if anybody wants to add on that, but also I want to hear what their thoughts on research that doesn't go so well on pivoting, and how do you frame it well. So I'll pass on to Gabe and Russ to answer the second part of that question.
Yeah, so I think, unfortunately, as a field in computer science, we don't really, it's hard to publish. It's just about impossible to publish negative results, right? Like, we don't have the same respect for that in publication that they do in like some other fields, and I think that's unfortunate. But I don't see. I think it's unlikely that to change in the near future. And I certainly don't have any ability to change it. I think hopefully, it can possibly be a kind of, maybe a launching board, like a springboard to, pointing you into directions towards things that could potentially work. Maybe that's maybe one way to kind of salvage this. Okay, look, we tried this approach and it just completely didn't work. And maybe it can provide some sort of inspiration to, like, you got to take a step back and try something completely different, or look at it from a different way. But it's very hard to publish, or just about impossible to publish negative work. It's hard.
The advice I would give. So right now I'm working with a PhD student at Berkeley, actually, who's in the middle of sort of transitioning his work. His advisor does a lot of work in sort of like core electrical engineering things, and he's actually a lot more interested. We're doing a lot of work with the large language models and knowledge graphs and investigating this boundary between neural and symbolic forms of knowledge. Like, so how do we do that? How do we pitch that? And the thing that we sort of found is to focus on translational techniques is emphasize maybe like rather than emphasizing the negative results, emphasize what you learned from working in that other field. And one of the things that we've done, so specifically for this one case, is a very common thing for testing lots of like huge numbers of hardware configurations is doing very efficient sampling of a gigantic space. And it turns out when your LLMs are really expensive to call, being able to leverage statistical techniques that lower the cost of doing those experiments ends up being really helpful. And so the sort of the pitch for the research is we're taking techniques from this other field where maybe he's published a couple papers and we're applying them to this new problem. And then the pitch becomes, right, again, the same set of facts. You can look at it as like, oh, I failed in this one field and I'm trying something different. The other pivot on that is I learned a bunch of techniques that are helpful for these kinds of problems. And it turns out this other field has a lot of those same kinds of problems. And I'm beginning to pioneer the use of these methods that address gaps in the way that research is done in another field. And that's ends up being it ends up being a much stronger story, right? Of like emphasizing and like what's the impact of that for someone reading your application is this is someone that knows how to use techniques, right? They learn techniques, they can apply them to new fields. This is someone that knows how to do translation. Learning computer science in many ways is solving the most abstract version of a problem. And so if you can take an abstraction from one field and you can apply, it's like, hey, you kind of squint, you look at this other field, it's the same kind of problem, or it's a similar kind of problem, and provides a novel perspective on that kind of research. Again, it's nice if you can back that up with a publication if you are pivoting. It's nice to be able to, you know, prove that that did work, that someone in that other field sees merit in that approach. But that's a recent example where someone's pivoting and that's how we've chosen to look at it, and that seems pretty successful so far.
I'd also make sure you tell the story about your pivot. The story behind the pivot is a powerful one. Is it that you were doing something, it was productive, but over here there was more potential for this? Like, I'm digging for gold over here, but over there, that looks actually like a better potential to have some results. And so it depends how far the pivot is. Is it maybe changing entire fields or just changing a little bit of the focus? So it could also be new opportunities came by. If you decided, like we heard a comment that was earlier, like I'm being asked to think about AI in my work where I wasn't. Well, AI is a new thing, and all of a sudden, there's new tools have all these opportunities available to them because this new thing came in. A lot of people pivoted their work during COVID to think about it. Could I change to make better masks or to make things? So sometimes something external creates an opportunity or a challenge, and that is a great reason that a pivot would be appropriate and actually be pitched well. Because of this, because of COVID, I'm now looking at, a lot of my colleagues looked at, could we use social media and could we kind of analyze social media to figure out where outbreaks are as another data point to figure out where outbreaks are, in addition to looking at the water testing and the stool sample and all the things and all the hospital numbers that are CDC approved. Can we look at social media? Can we look at something of who's asking, I've got a fever, right? That's an interesting thing. So you're using this pivot as an opportunity using that as an opportunity rather than because it was a challenge and it didn't work and you weren't getting any results, so you changed over. But again, it also it isn't a bad thing to know and to tell the reader that when things aren't going well. The reason I pivoted was things weren't going well because of this, and I tried to squeeze blood from a stone and didn't get it. That tells the reader that, hey, when to pull back and to change gears. So I think it really depends how. I think it really is important that you sell it well and you explain the reasons behind it. I think that's not a bad thing. And I think pivoting is a bad thing. If people never change what they did, if you decided when you left and you got a first-year job to do X and things don't go well, please think about changing. People went into power electronics and there aren't any power electronics departments or fields double E, power electronics was a thing for a while and it wasn't a thing for a while, right? AI has grown to be a thing. So these things evolve and change and move dynamically. So you often want to kind of move with the current as well. And I think that's an important thing to say. I know I can smell where funding opportunities are, where we're making an impact is changing. And I'm going to use different tools or different techniques or even change entire fields because I want to go where the action is. You want to be in the room where it happens. So that's an important thing.
One more thing to add to that is just really quickly, one kind of interview question that I got a lot and that I use now when people are interviewing with our department is, what if, about pivoting is, what if the problem you're working on, what if you solved it? What are you going to do next? What's your next? Right? So that's sort of the other way, right? You're moving on to something because you conquered what you were working on. So pivoting is important for many reasons. One, because it doesn't work, but also possibly because it does work. But you should be thinking about what to do next.
That's a really good point. It's almost like, here's what I'm working on. And then someone could say, well, how long are you going to keep working on it? Like, what's your end goal? Is it, no, keep working on it, keep grinding away to kind of have better learning objectives, learning outcomes? Or is there something you're trying to hit? You're trying to hit the, petaflop, exaflop space. Okay, what happens when you get there? Can you stop and do something else? Like, it's an interesting, do you have an end case? Do you have kind of an end case to your for loop that it's going to eventually get out of it? When do you break? Powerful things to ask. And how would you know? All those things are great to ask as a follow-up to, so here's what you plan to do. Nicely done. I'm looking at time and I want to make sure that I do honor the folks' time, and also want to thank and have a chance to thank my amazing panelists. Let's give them a hand. Let's give these folks a hand. Russ and Gabe, amazing. Woo! Thank you so much for this unbelievable panel. Whoop, whoop. We covered everything. The time went really fast. I really appreciate the interaction we had from Andre and Joe and other folks who have asked questions. I really, Iman, great job on those questions. I also appreciate Valerie for bringing that question about pivoting, because sometimes it's hard. Oh, should I feel guilty about that? No, not at all. This is your story. This is what happened. And it's great to tell those stories and be able to frame them well. So again, thank you all for this. I believe in 1 hour, am I right, Valerie? In 1 hour, we've got another same bat channel, same bat time. There's another wonderful webinar. I actually had the name right up, but then I lost the frame.
It's on what to expect of faculty candidates.
Yes, thank you.
Yes.
So, wonderful. Thank you all for attending. I really appreciate this. Again, Russ and Gabe, always a pleasure to see you again and to share the stage with you, my friends. This is wonderful. And thank you, Valerie, for what you do.
Yes, thank you, Valerie.
And the whole team, the whole commanded team. It takes a village. Thank you all for what you do to make these so successful.
Yes, so thank you to Tamika and Shannon for facilitating, and to our panelists.
Thank you.
So Dan, Russ, and Gabe. Woo woo.
So much.
I want to say one more thing. Like, if I have been, any successes that I've had in my career have been largely, I would say, due to my attendance at workshops like these that Valerie and folks like Valerie have been putting together for years. So again, thanks. And the advice that you get at these types of workshops, they work. Like I'm proof of it. If
that's awesome.
Whatever.
It is great. So thank you, everyone, and hope you have a great and fun weekend.
Wonderful.
Yes,
thanks, everybody. Good to see you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
That's great.